to another episode of the Catholic Buzz podcast. Thanks for joining us. We're continuing our conversation on so many things that have to do with our Catholic faith. My name is Father Daniele, and I'm joined by Josh Sullivan over here.
Hello.
Josh, welcome.
Thank you.
And we're joined also by Matt Van Milligan. Matthew,
hi.
Welcome. I don't know why I got a little tongue twist in there. Maybe I haven't seen Matt in a while, and I just, was like, oh, he's actually here in front of me, So thanks for joining us today as we continue our conversation, because what we're talking about today is kind of really cool. I mean, so we've been kind of on this roll here lately. We started with Matt's sort of journey to become Catholic. Then we talked about some Protestant objections to the Catholic faith, right? And we talked a lot about Mary in that episode when we were talking about those objections. So we're going to continue talking about Mary, which is amazing because
we're in May.
It's
month
the
of
month
Mary.
So we're going to be talking today about a teaching of the church, a dogma of the church that some people may not really grasp or understand, or maybe they wonder where exactly we get it from. It's the assumption of Mary. So before we get into all the details of dogma and what the Pope Pius XII said and all those different things, the assumption of Mary, if I may, in the simplest of terms.
If you may.
In the simplest of terms, before we get into the theology, it's the belief that Mary was assumed into heaven, which means her body and soul was taken from the earth and lifted into the heavens, right? And so that's the easiest way. That's where we get the assumption from. It was assumed. So the difference here is, like, when I die, my body stays here, and my soul, I encounter the judgment of God, and my soul is sort of placed in one of the three categories of heaven, hell, or purgatory, right? Mary was assumed right into heaven. She and there's a little fuzzy area whether she died first or fell asleep
and then went. So the other thing I love about, because we were talking about the difference in Protestant faith with Mary and everything else, but one of the words that we use differently, Jesus ascended into heaven, Mary was assumed into heaven.
Yeah.
And the difference there is basically Jesus ascended on his own power.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Jesus being God, just like he went up. Whereas an assumed is like she was brought up.
Yeah.
She didn't go on her own.
Exactly.
Volition.
Exactly. She was
assumed,
God
taken
up into heaven.
So that's what we're going to explore today, the assumption of Mary. And but it's if we're going to do it justice, we're going to go back
a couple. Yeah. She's not the first one.
She's not the first one.
That's the big
according
one,
to the scriptures.
Exactly.
Right, according to the scriptures. So where is the first example of someone being taken up into heaven?
Yeah, so the first is Genesis 6, I believe. Is Enoch. 5. Oh,
Genesis 5.
I was close.
I was stumped, Matt.
Yeah.
Wow. Remember this day.
The early parts of Genesis. So
in the earlier book of Genesis. Yeah.
No, and the only reason I remember is Enoch. So somebody who walked with God, and we don't know very much about
Not
Enoch.
a lot at all. No.
That he 350-ish, 360-ish years old. Walked with God, pleased God, and was taken up into heaven. So this is the first example, but it's not clear that he was assumed. He was taken up, or like that's the language that we get in Genesis, and also in Hebrews. But it's in that part of Genesis, and this is why I remember it's the early part of Genesis, that is using that the simplified verse style of Hebrew that's representative of the first
5 books.
Quite a few chapters of Genesis, all the way up until Abraham.
Oh yeah.
So again, it's that language of taken up is in that. So it could be he died and was taken to heaven. It could be that it was like spoiler alert, Elijah or Mary, that he was assumed body and soul into heaven. But because we don't have a lot of data there, he's the precedent, but we're not sure that it's kind of the same kind that Mary was.
That's right. And actually, the book of Hebrews references Enoch as well in chapter 11, verse 5. It says, by faith Enoch was taken so that he did not experience death, and he was not found because God had taken him. For it was attested he was taken away that he had pleased God.
Yeah.
So there's this, explanation that Enoch was pleasing to God. God had taken him, and even from the earliest of chapters of Genesis, again, the author of the letter of Hebrews is mentioning it. So that's really the first encounter in the scriptures, chronologically, that from the scriptures, that we see someone assumed or taken, right?
Yeah.
Into heaven.
Saved from death.
Saved from death.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. And we know, this goes back to what we were talking about in Genesis, is that death was a consequence of sin.
Yeah.
Right? And that was, and so we were born with original sin. We had original sin. Does that mean Enoch, we don't really, that's a whole other theological debate, right?
Yeah.
Did Enoch not have original sin? Or?
Well, no, and not to get into a huge digression, because I realize that's a possibility for me. That like the wage for sin is death. The consequence of original sin is that, you'll work hard, you have all these kind of physical consequences, and you will die.
Yeah.
But also a recognition that wasn't the plan from the beginning.
Yeah.
That, again, fast forwarding to Mary and the Assumption and the, even the saints, the saints in heaven, this was the plan from the beginning. We weren't made to work hard, to suffer, and to die. We were made to be with God in heaven. And, as a result of original sin, as a result of our own sin, death is a consequence of that. But again, that you don't get to the New Testament and realize that, heaven is an afterthought.
Yeah.
Because again, historically, contextually, and I realize this is actually becoming a digression, that, by the time of Jesus and Mary, the certain sects of Judaism had lost sight of this to the point that, some of them didn't believe in the resurrection. Some of them didn't believe in the afterlife. Again, you have these moments in the Old Testament that actually point to the fact that, we're made for heaven. That, there are, we're made to be saints.
And this is kind of actually, because, talking about the Assumption specifically, though, Enoch to Mary is also another thing that there's a misunderstanding, or the Immaculate Conception, born without sin, and those types of things. But God is kind of proving that through Enoch, that he's out, this is the rule that he set down, or this is the consequence of death. But he's also stepped outside for Enoch. Why wouldn't he do so with his mother, right? And that's so kind of going through, and just Mary can be without sin. She's still saved through Christ, but it's the saving grace of Christ that saves her, but before she was born, which is kind of cool. That's the Immaculate Conception part of this, not the Assumption.
That's right. And the next person in the scriptures to be taken to heaven,
Elijah. Now, I think Matt has very specific, because if I'm going to say this and then he's going to correct me, Elijah was taken on a chariot of fire into heaven.
I was just asking, do you know how he was taken into heaven?
It's not a chariot of fire.
It's not a chariot.
Oh, my goodness. What is it?
It's a whirlwind.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, here it is. Okay?
The chariot of fire comes down.
Yes.
That's
God,
right.
Yeah, God comes in a chariot.
It's 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 11. As they continued walking and talking, so of course we're talking about Elijah and Elisha. As they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them.
Oh,
and Elijah ascended in a whirlwind into heaven.
So, big chariot of fire comes down, separates them, and then all of a sudden, Elijah gets abducted by aliens.
Yes,
a whirlwind he goes up into the sky.
And it says, Elisha, how sad is this? It says,
the cloak.
Elisha kept watching and crying out, Father, Father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen. But when he could no longer see him, he grasped his own clothes and tore them into two pieces.
Wasn't there something about
heartbroken?
Yeah, but there's his cloak.
Yeah, he picked up the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. I didn't want to read the whole chapter.
Yeah. I'm just saying, what I remember is a cloak flight and flowing down, or something happened. It was so fast that he left his coat. He just got, whoa.
So we got Enoch, we got Elijah. They are taken up into heaven.
In scriptures.
In the scriptures.
Yeah.
Okay?
There's precedent.
Yeah.
So now we're moving to the Assumption of Mary.
Exactly.
And one thing, it became a dogma of the church in 1950, which is really not that long ago.
No, not bad.
Pope Pius XII
Yeah.
decreed in in an apostolic constitution, and its Latin title Munificentissimus Deus, defining the dogma of the Assumption. And a dogma of the church is a teaching of the church that is to be held by all the faithful. Okay, but one thing I do want to say is it's not like this dogma came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like Pope Pius XII liked Mary so much that he was like, I'm gonna.
He just announced it. Yeah.
You know, it was in fact a belief of the church for a long, long time, right? It wasn't just something new that people started to think, started to talk about.
Yeah. And maybe to add just like a little note on this, like this is actually how doctrine and dogma are established. That that they don't go to the effort of, explicitly stating and clarifying and making sure that everybody knows that this is dogma of something that people already understand and believe, and as part of the deposit of faith, or as part of the the fullness of the revelation in Scripture and tradition. That it's normally, a lot of times historically in the church, that when a certain assumed theology is comes under fire, or people are voicing objections to it, that the church actually steps in to clarify and establish something as doctrine or dogma.
Yeah. So JP2 noted that the first traces of belief in the Virgin's Assumption can be found in the apocryphal accounts entitled Transitus Maria, the crossing over of Mary, whose original origins date to the 2nd and 3rd centuries. And so these are popular and sometimes romanticized depictions which going on. So these are writings from the 2nd or 3rd century, 200 years, 300 years after Jesus died, that talk about Mary being assumed. And sometimes, like he said, it's sometimes romanticized, or the idea of what exactly happened at that time. But they're not to be discounted just because of that. They're not going to be gospel, but they aren't discounted. You're allowed to to read those and understand what the church fathers teach.
That's right. And Pope Benedict XVI actually said something that helped me understand this a little better. And I'm just going to say, Pope Benedict XVI, he says, because Mary had made room for the Lord in her soul, she really became the true temple where God made himself incarnate. For this reason, her body can never lose this dignity. Mary is blessed because, totally in body and soul and forever, she became the Lord's dwelling place. Her bodily assumption then precedes the general resurrection because of her unique participation in her son's incarnation, and thus also as his mother in his public ministry and crucifixion. Having uniquely dwelt with her, her son uniquely exalts her.
I like that.
Yeah. I mean,
Pope Benedict's prose is so good. Right. Just
Every time he comes in, he's just with a hammer.
But doesn't that make a lot more sense?
Yeah, for sure. And you think about it too. Like we talked about it, but so the wages of sin is death. And the corruption of your body, and we don't know. We know that's going to be a glorified body in the resurrection. We're not exactly sure what that means. There's a lot of theological debate about it, but that your body would be corrupted to a point. We know that happens even with baptized people, but Jesus saving Mary's body from that, and like we said, we don't actually. This teaching doesn't say that Mary died and then was assumed into heaven, body and her soul into heaven, or that she was like Elijah, just kind of taken up all of a sudden, all at the same time. We have no idea, and it doesn't say whether she died or not.
That's right.
There was suggestion that some of the even Pope JP2s talked about that. The understanding that if Mary did die, it wasn't as a consequence of sin, because wages of sin is death, but it was actually because she was already sanctified through Christ. Christ had already sanctified her and prepared her body and stuff. That she died because she was one of the few people that transitioned through Christ through his entire life, and she was the first disciple. And so, because she was the first disciple, she went through the birth. She was there at the birth of Jesus, and she was there at the death of Jesus, and she went through the pains during the scourging. Well, we don't know if it was scourging, but necessarily, but the passion of Christ. She was there. We know she was there, and so she witnessed. And she's the other person that would have experienced a mother's pain, a mother's heart throughout the entire thing. And so, likewise, if she did die, she followed in the footsteps of Christ to her death.
Yeah.
And then was assumed her body into heaven. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And I think like there's an argument to be made that like theologically it makes more sense that she didn't die. So like you have kind of early versions of the Assumption, and again you said that this isn't something new in the church. You have depictions of the Assumption in sacred art going way back,
Yeah.
and you have in the early versions of the Assumption of Mary as the Dormition of Mary, and in the Eastern Church they still hold the Dormition of Mary is that Mary fell asleep and then was brought up into heaven. So she didn't experience death in the way that we would normally understand. But there's also kind of in terms of kind of fittingness, as Mary as the new Eve. So you have the initial fall in the garden that the serpent says to Eve, when you eat of the fruit, you won't die. Your eyes will be opened, and you'll be like God, knowing the difference between good and evil. It's like, but that's the deception that the consequence of original sin is that you would die. Then it's like Mary as the new Eve. There's a really interesting kind of asymmetry there. That it's fitting that she was preserved from that original sin. She was that you were saying earlier that kind of the Immaculate Conception and the Assumption kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah.
That there's that it's fitting that she wouldn't experience the consequence of natural death that was a direct result of the fall.
Yeah.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but the church in the East, the Eastern churches still celebrate the Dormition of Mary.
They still refer to it as that.
Or still refer to it as the Dormition of Mary.
Yeah.
So they say that she fell asleep. She went into a deep sleep.
Yeah.
It's not like, it's to differentiate like falling asleep from like taking a nap.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think to differentiate it from dying, from experiencing natural death as well. Yeah.
Okay, so there's this Dormition of Mary. She falls into sleep and then is assumed into heaven. That's right, and that's how they celebrate it there. Now, a question for you guys: if when we refer to this event, the Assumption of Mary, why did it take so long, if we may? If people did believe it from the earliest days, there was depictions like from the 2nd century of the Assumption of Mary. There was beliefs of it there. Why did it take almost 2,000 years for the church to declare it in this way?
I don't know. It kind of comes down to the definition of dogma itself. Or why does the church feel the need to declare dogmas in the first place? And a lot of times it's articles of faith that aren't immediately apparent from the revelation in sacred scripture. So and you have this going as far back as the Trinity. That one of the early declarations was in the Trinity, because the Trinity as such, nowhere in the Bible will you find the word Trinity, but it's something that everyone up until that point just accept, like that you have Father, Son, Holy Spirit as persons represented in the Trinity. And it wasn't until kind of early church councils where people are kind of attacking the role of Jesus within the Trinity, or there's disputes among that the church steps in to clarify. So you can say that dogmas are reserved for those things that aren't immediately apparent in Scripture, that there's either a historical moment or a theological need to provide clarification. So you would say kind of it wasn't maybe until the 1950s that and you could identify a number of factors that even kind of the maybe sort of like a Protestant rejection of Marian theology, that the church really needs to make a clear declaration that this is actually what we believe.
Yeah. And I was just thinking too, because Our Lady of Lourdes, when did that happen? I'm just looking to. Lady of Lourdes. So what? The Immaculate Conception came first, and so when we're talking about divinely revealed, and we've talked about this, I think, in a past episode, that the messenger of the Lord came down and said, "Hail Mary, full of grace." the full of grace, if you translate that back into Latin or the Greek, it was a perfect past tense. And we don't have that in English. So we say, Hail Mary, full of grace. So like, hey, you're full of grace. But what it meant was you were perfectly full of grace, meaning you are perfectly sinless. And that's where, like, that was before Christ. That was before the conception of Christ, if we want to call it that. When the angel Gabriel came and said to Mary, you have been sanctified by grace, in the past tense. So the Immaculate Conception coming forth, and the church was wrestling with that. Once they wrestled with that, and then we had Our Lady of Lourdes, so Bernadette, and all that stuff kind of came forward, and God used the miracle of Lourdes just to kind of prove that this was what he was saying. He introduced it to a little 13-year-old girl or whatever it was, that I am the Immaculate Conception. And so once the Immaculate Conception became dogma, and it was revealed in scriptures, as it was through the messenger of Christ and messenger of God, in the angel Gabriel. Now the church is starting to wrestle with, what does that mean about the rest of Mary's life, right? And I
see what you're saying.
And so now, like, why was it in the 1950s? Because if Lourdes happened before that, and it wasn't.
So Lourdes is 1858.
1858. So just 100 years before that, they started to, and now they're dealing with, okay, so she was immaculate conceived. Okay, now we're
focused on what else about Mary can we define here,
because we know this, and God not only he spoke through miracles to show us that this is the path. And so through the divine nature of God and through the magisterium of the church, we've declared this. Now let's go further. And so now they're trying to figure out the assumption. So like we know about the life, the beginning of Mary. What about the death of Mary? There's not a lot to know there. And it's a little bit, I'm going to say it's a stretch because it's not assumed in the scriptures, meaning there's no mention of Mary being assumed body and soul into heaven in the scriptures. But through precedent, we understand that it's been done before, and specifically because people have been right in the eyes of God. He lived a good Enoch is what I'm thinking of. But then also Mary, we knew what Mary was because of the Immaculate Conception. So using what we know about Immaculate Conception, knowing that we know about God and Enoch, it can combine like this teaching of the church, the assumption that's been believed since 200 AD. 200 AD. We can assume that this is potentially true.
I wonder, like, what would someone's objection be to God assuming Mary into heaven? Like,
would it be that we're putting Mary on a different level above everybody else?
Yeah.
I mean, in ways we're not, because we got Enoch and Elijah before him.
But given what you've just said,
yeah,
Mary being immaculately conceived,
yeah,
right? She's the one who's brought Jesus into the world, right? And obviously the love that Jesus had for her on earth.
Yeah.
Like for me, it's like, okay, well, this is and what Matt described as the new Eve. So where would there be a hard objection to the assumption of Mary, and why? Like,
that's why I identified as maybe a potential factor there is kind of Protestant pushback against the significance of Mary. We're maybe elevating Mary too high, but it could also be like Lourdes is a good example, but with the increase in Marian apparitions, like approved Marian apparitions, that there's like just a recognition in the church that Mary's intercession is actually efficacious, especially in this time. I think Fatima is a good kind of example of that, but that there's also a tendency to maybe pick that up and run with it
the wrong way,
too far, or in the wrong way, or in the wrong direction, and that could be an occasion for the church to maybe offer these clarifications or these kind of, just to provide that clarity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's say, for example, this dogma wasn't promulgated. Is that the right word? Until 1950. No, you're a Catholic before 1950, and you're a card-carrying member of the Catholic faith.
you got your little baptismal certificate.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. And the Pope declares this dogma, and you're not really sure of it. What does that mean for, like, does a Catholic have to assent and believe to this dogma of the Assumption?
That's the right way of putting it. So, articles of dogma, the faithful are required to assent. That this is. Does that mean you can't struggle with it? No. Does that mean you can't question it or explore it more to try and understand it better? No. Does it you're
encouraged to.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're wrestling with that. That was one of the things. We've talked about the infallibility teachings of the Pope. One of the first episodes that we ever did back at like 3 years ago. But so go back and watch that if you want to talk about the infallibility of when the Pope doesn't do that kind of a thing. Hardly ever.
Yeah.
And so there are very few specific times in the history of the church where the Pope has actually gotten up and spoken infallibly about a specific dogma of the church or something. This was one of those times. It was in 1950 where Pope Pius got up and did that. He spoke infallibly. And so because of that, the teaching is infallibly defined by Pope Pius XII on November 1st of 1950. And this is so Pope Pius XII explained that this is divinely revealed dogma. And so now, again, you're allowed to question and struggle, but to understand that this is what the magisterium of the church, this is what God revealed to us. Like, what does the church have to benefit from this? Nothing. Right? Like, there's no like they can sell the Assumption of Mary church bracelets. I don't know. We changed the name. It's not a big deal. So the church doesn't really benefit from this at all, other than trying to clarify and bring truth to very specific circumstances. What it could show is that Mary has a very important role to play in showing that, right? But I don't think, again, we've talked about this many times, but like, you can never love Mary more than Jesus loved his mom, right? And doing so venerating Mary, different than worshiping Mary. And anybody who venerates Mary, I'm going to say, is always going to find themselves eventually talking to Jesus again, because Mary, you can only. Mary's the glass prism. She's the moon that reflects the sunlight. Like, there is not talking directly to her as much as through her to her son. And so the grace that you're looking for is always coming right from God.
So my last question here, as we're going to wrap up here a little bit, is what implications for us in our lives? Like, how does it change us as Catholics, or how does it change us as people who love the Lord? That Mary was assumed into heaven. Like, what implications does it have for us?
Okay, so like jumping back to the Eastern, and I want to say Eastern Church, but this was the case for the whole church up until a certain point in history. The main way they referred to Mary is as the Theotokos, the bearer of Christ.
Right.
And in Mary's sense, that was a very literal sense. She bore Christ. But in a figurative sense, or in the way that we're all called to emulate Mary's attitude, echo Mary's yes, that we are to be bearers of Christ, that we are to be that the reward for Enoch for walking with God was being called to heaven. Elijah, after a faithful life, was called to heaven. Mary, by giving her yes to God, was called to heaven. That all of us are called to be many Theotokoses. If my plural Greek is is good there. Theotokai? Yeah. Is that this is something we should try to emulate. That Mary's virtue should be our virtue, and we should do that with the hope of heaven.
Yeah, and that's the end goal, and Mary proves that through the Assumption. Yeah. Our yes, heaven.
Yeah.
Right?
Just like her yes,
heaven. Right? I mean, that's yeah.
Well, thanks for the discussion today that we've had on Mary and the Assumption. Like I said, it's something that I didn't. It's something that I just accepted.
Of course, yeah.
Like God assumes Mary into heaven. Okay. Like,
makes sense. He loves his mom.
He loves his mom.
If I was gonna do it, if I was God, it makes sense.
Yeah, you know what I mean. So, but there's much more to it, and there is biblical precedence to it. There is a tradition of the church of the early Christians throughout history who have believed in it. It's taken a while for the church to proclaim it as a dogma, like 1950. But that doesn't mean that it's new, that it's come out of nowhere, and we're just trying to put Mary on this other pedestal. And I like, Josh, what you said today about when the church started to focus around, when these apparitions of Mary started to really take popularity, and we had to, the church had to define some things about Mary, then it started to take a closer look at her life and see what else that it can declare. And so for us, at the end of the day, Matt, what you said this is a model for us. This is a model for us that we are to be people who, our yes transforms into love for God. And that's our hope. Our hope is to be in heaven with all the saints, and especially Mary, who bore God and was assumed into heaven. That's all the time we got. If someone has any questions about the Assumption or anything else about Mary, as we have shared a number of episodes on Mary during this month of May, you can send us an email at askus@thecatholicbuzz.com or leave a comment on our Facebook or Instagram pages. That's all the time we got. So for Josh Sullivan and Matt Van Milligan, my name is Father Daniele. We'll see you next time on The Catholic Buzz.